I didn't know until a couple weeks ago that you were deep down the rabbit hole, just like me, but
Yeah.
more so than you lead on. I feel like you're a lot deeper than I would have ever guessed. And you're sending me ebooks and shit. And
I'm
I'm
a
like,
researcher, bro. You know I'm a researcher.
you're a researcher.
I'm an investigator.
How did you get into it? What got you into the rabbit hole? What was that moment? And then what are some of the conclusions that you've come to about it?
Oh man, I'm trying to think, I'll say that in 2012 is when I got into law of attraction and just like spiritual type stuff. That's when I started reading, because I'd read The Secret before, but I started reading more spiritual type books and getting into opening my mind up. Because my mind was always open, but I just wasn't absorbing this type of material. Like I started with self-help type stuff, Tony Robbins, and it was like the first program I listened to was Personal Power. And then because my mind is wide open and I'm a curious person, like, what do you think is going to happen? Eventually, I'm going to keep going deeper. Like it's
and
just.
You even had an experience recently where it all came to fruition recently, right? I didn't mean.
Where I saw I had a sighting.
The little floating white balls above New York City.
Yeah. I mean that seems to happen. That was pretty dramatic the way that it happened that day. I know it didn't catch it as well on camera, but you could still see it a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, it still looked kind of crazy from the video you sent me. If I can find it, I might have the editor throw it on top of this video to show what I'm talking about. But anyway, sorry to cut you off, man. Like, where were you at?
No, I mean, there's so many different directions we can go in, right? But I guess I just wanted to mention, even for people that aren't into this, which I don't know anyone listening to this at this point that probably wouldn't be after watching all your podcasts.
If they stuck through the numerology part, they'll definitely stick through the UFO part.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. But this is good. You're gonna weed out your people, and I think if you're anything like me, you want some weirdness in your crowd because that makes things fun. Makes things fun. But this just kind of naturally happened as a result of me being very curious and opening up my mind and going in these different avenues. And just having certain experiences, like when I was younger, I was very afraid of aliens, where my biggest fear when I was in elementary school was of being abducted. And it wasn't even necessarily just of being abducted by aliens, but I was just scared of being abducted, where before I would go to bed, I'd have my mom promise me that no one is going to come through the window and take me. It was crazy. Dang. That was my life. That was where my head was at in terms of my fears. And I remember watching this one documentary. It was like a fake documentary.
Was it the time?
No, this is when I was very young.
Okay.
7, 8 years old, something like that. And it was a fictional movie, but it was done, and this was before its time, actually, now that I think about it. This was done kind of like Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch style, where it was actual video footage. And it was of these alien beings abducting, infiltrating these people's houses and abducting them. And it was terrifying to me. And I don't know, if that activated something in me where maybe I had some type of experience, because from what I've read and me looking into this and people that have been abducted and stuff like that, you often actually choose to forget. Just like how you suppress certain things that you don't want to remember. Yeah. If it's a fearful experience, it'll be like a co-creation in that sense, where, because these beings have technologies that can allow that type of thing to happen, where there's maybe you don't remember it, but then all of a sudden, something like that happens where I'm watching a video and that triggers the fear and it comes up. So I feel like that might have been what happened, because I have had all types of dreams where a spaceship coming down. Yeah. And I had one recently, and this was crazy. And I looked this up afterwards. So I had this dream that I saw a UFO coming down like a disc-shaped object, and it was super real, very vivid. And it was like I was in Arizona actually, but you know, dreams, they don't have to be exact. Yeah. So I see it and I got excited because this is like stuff I'm excited about now, is if I see something, you know, I see a UFO, excited. And it comes down, and I don't remember anything after that other than that I was frozen in midair at one point where it was like I couldn't move. And I could actually turn my head a little bit, but my body was, I was just kind of hanging in the air. And I looked that up afterwards, like that type of experience, because it felt very real. Yeah. Like it was, I don't know, some kind of memory or something. And there are people that have talked about how that is like something they experienced, where when you come back from an experience like that, you're kind of, because they're shifting dimensions and they're shifting like energies, that you have to be kind of like sleep paralysis is a common theme actually from people that have said that they've experienced abductions. Yeah. Because they're like, their energy, their body is coming back from somewhere else where there were different shifts and energy, you know, energy work going on. So yeah, that's what I've read about. That's from my understanding.
So a couple things from your story really appealed to me. One was the irrational, deep fear of being abducted as a kid. Mm-hmm. Do you think that came from somewhere, or have you always had that fear as long as you can remember?
I don't know where it came from. I really don't.
So that's what really stands out to me, because my girlfriend is the exact same way. I mean, I didn't even really go down the alien rabbit hole until like maybe a year ago, but my girlfriend has an irrational fear, a phobia of aliens and being abducted and UFOs. And I have no clue why. And I always joke, hey, maybe she was abducted once and she's trying to suppress the memory. I don't know, but it's really funny. And what's ironic about that is her parents are also really into UFOs, because we're in Phoenix and her parents were here during the Phoenix lights. And they see stuff by their house all the time, to the point where her aunt has actually, her aunt is basically her mom, her aunt and uncle raised her, will go in her car and just like try to chase these lights in her car. So yeah, she has an irrational fear of those. But then the second thing that stood out to me was the sleep paralysis thing, because do you experience sleep paralysis at all?
Ever? Not as much anymore, but yeah, I have in the past. And in that dream, even though I didn't wake up in sleep paralysis, I had that experience of it, which was super vivid.
Got it. So I think I told you this over text a couple weeks ago. I've never really looked into the abduction stuff, because I feel like it's harder for me to believe someone recounting an experience that may or may not have happened versus me saying, this is a sighting. Nobody can explain that, but we all saw it. So that's kind of the stuff that I tend to look into. But then I know I've had a lot of experience just like with sleep paralysis myself, being afraid, waking up, not being able to move, not being able to scream for help because your vocal cord is paralyzed, right? So it's a scary experience. But now when I experience it, I know I've had it happen enough to where I know that I'm 2 seconds away from experiencing it. I'm like, oh, fuck. Oh shit, now I'm stuck again, because it's happened that common. And I think for people who have actually experienced sleep paralysis, because that's, I think, the argument against abduction cases is like, maybe they're dreaming being abducted when they're really in sleep paralysis. And I know from my experience of sleep paralysis, yeah, you hear random shit, voices, you see shadows, but I know for a fact I wasn't being abducted, right? And so you being someone who's looked into it, has the fear of being abducted, had a vivid experience to where you felt like it was real, but you've also experienced sleep paralysis. In your head, is there a clear difference between those two experiences?
Between
sleep paralysis and that memory of you, or dream of you being abducted that felt real?
Yeah, I mean, obviously not all sleep paralysis is abduction related, right? I mean, I don't believe that, but as being the investigator archetype, I look for connections. And so when I see enough connections and when I really feel like there's something here, I kind of go with it and it snowballs. And then, all these different things open up and you start to see these things that you just didn't see before, so I'll tie this into now, because the abduction phenomenon, that has to do with the gray aliens, like the gray species, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know this with Phoenix Lights, but do you know who's supposed to be behind that?
I have no idea, bro.
You have no idea. Okay. So
this is exciting for me because usually I'm the one who knows more of the facts than the person I'm talking to.
Yeah. So the beings that are supposed to be behind that,
yeah,
are a civilization called the Yael, and they have certain types of ships, those triangular ships.
Okay.
And they have certain formations. So when you see certain sightings where you notice that, just like the one that I experienced over here, well, they will be in threes. They'll be like in V formations. That is supposed to be a specific civilization. And how do I know? How could I say like, oh, Yael, where'd you get that from? All of this information it's coming from people, and this is where it gets really crazy, is people that are like channelers or that have had experiences where they literally, just like a near-death experience, where you come back and you feel like you had this very real experience that you can't explain, but you feel like you had it and like you received information from it. Because otherwise, how would we know? Like, they're not on this earth. They're not on this planet. We can only know these things from encounters in different altered states that we can't explain other than this was my experience. And so there's through experiences like that where people will give that type of information, but also different channelers and stuff like that. And what the consensus is, and if you look this up, you'll see this is like amongst
Yael. Do you know?
Yahyel.
Okay, I'll look it up for sure.
Yeah, and so here's where it gets really interesting, right? So these beings, being that, if you think about it, Phoenix Lights, the biggest sighting ever in the United States, right? They made themselves known, like it was super evident.
Yeah. Do you think it was a bunch of ships in formation, or do you think it was one giant ship with lights?
It looked like from because I watched the documentary recently.
Yeah.
It looked like a mothership to me. It looked like a giant one, like miles wide, like huge. And if you look at the footage, like do you have a take on that? Because from what I saw, that's what it looks like. But maybe there were other ships as well involved, but I think it was one big one.
That's the thing, is the Phoenix Lights is probably the most famous case of a mass sighting because thousands of people across the whole valley saw it. And from the documentaries I've seen, the little bit of research I've done on myself outside of the documentaries, I'm unable to find a consensus. There's a lot of people who say they saw the shape block out the stars above it, which is evidence that it could have been one giant ship and it was just hovering. But then I've also seen footage once, and it stood out to me. That's why I remember it, but I haven't been able to find it again, where one of the lights kind of zipped into place, which means that it was probably a smaller ship that zipped into formation. So I don't know.
Or it could have been just going, because these things, like, they're able to shift in and out. Because my girlfriend has seen a ship. I've seen the sightings here. I've seen videos of the same type of ships. And I'm talking about, now these are more, I guess you would say, like scout ships where it's not a mothership.
Yeah.
They can just pop in and out because they could just pop in and out of different realities and dimensions. It's different technology, you know? So it's tough to pinpoint it, but from what I saw, it looked like it was one kind of massive ship, and maybe I'd have to watch it again. But anyway, so here's what's interesting, and of course, once you go down the route I'm talking about, where I'm giving you names of civilizations,
you're gonna get stuck in the hole. It's like quicksand.
Yeah, dude, you're not gonna prove, like, anyone that wants proof, you're not gonna prove it until there's a landing, right? But this is interesting stuff, and so we'll talk about it. So the idea is, and there are consensus, like what's interesting is that through multiple people's experiences, and this is how we came about this idea of the gray aliens and their different, like, characteristics and who they are. It's all through accounts of people. That's it. we don't have anyone, we don't have an alien on this earth to talk to. We don't have an extraterrestrial to talk to. So people forget that this is all based on people's personal accounts and different information, like I said, from people that are able to more easily tap into it, like channelers. But in this case, with this civilization, so the consensus agreement amongst many people is that this is the actual race that we would encounter first with first contact. And the reason why, and this actually makes a lot of sense, the reason why is because they're actually most like us. They are supposed to be, they have human genetics. So the idea is that if we're going to have some kind of open contact with a civilization, who's going to be the first one? Well, it would make sense that it would be the ones that we see them, we're like, oh, they're not actually that much different than us, but they're just like, they have extraterrestrial genetics. So now I'm gonna bring it to a really crazy level, right? And this is just, if you do research on this, I'm not the type of person that says this is true belief.
We are just reporters here of the
show. We are reporters. And I always tell people, do you like science fiction movies? Like, yeah, they're fun. I like them. Okay. This is the best fucking science fiction you can get, because you're investigating, you're looking into people's accounts, like actual real things that, and
backed up by a lot of footage too.
Yeah, by a lot of footage, by a lot of different, I mean, this is the real sci-fi, you know? So if anything, just see it as fun entertainment. And so that's how I look at it, especially when somebody is trying to question me too much. Like, dude, I'm just having fun. Like,
what frustrates me with the Phoenix Lights is maybe the government has covered it up so well to where the only thing that we know about the Phoenix Lights that we can say for sure is here's the footage of it. But that's it. We haven't heard any follow-up. The government just said it was flares, but flares don't hover over the entire state in formation at the same point in like at the same elevation and don't fall or don't go out for hours and hours, right? So it couldn't have been flares. But another thing like that really blew my mind, and I guess this is kind of why I asked you a few minutes ago, like what was the moment that you got deep into it, is because the moment for me was, yeah, it was all fun and games. I might as well have been talking about the boogeyman or Bigfoot when I'm talking about aliens and thinking about it. But then I did a quick Google search and I went to CIA.gov and I realized CIA.gov through the Freedom of Information Act has all these files, all these memos talking about flying saucers, talking about the cover up, talking about this stuff. And they're free to look at. And one of them that really stood out to me was a memo, a CIA.gov memo that had just pages and pages of pictures of flying saucers and famous sightings. So in my head, if there's nothing to the UFO conspiracy, then why is it on CIA.gov? And when I look deeper into it, you find out there's actual footage that many documentaries have footage of, but there's footage of apparently a time in the 50s, 1952, I believe. It was right after the mass sighting over Washington, D.C., which you can look up 1952 UFO over Washington, D.C. You'll see all the images of it. But apparently shortly after that, President Truman had this short period of time, like 3 or 4 hours, where he was in Southern California and he was off the books for a little bit. And so when they went back and asked him where he was like, oh, I went to an emergency dentist appointment. Okay, that seems like a bullshit excuse. But then there's actual footage of apparently this flying saucer flying over the hills in California and going towards Holloman Air Force Base, where they scheduled a meeting with the actual president of the United States. Now, the crazy part about this footage, and this is why it's controversial in all the documentaries that show it, is they'll show like the first, I don't know, a few seconds of the flying saucer kind of coming in, but then they cut the frame to where you don't see it actually land and then walk out. Apparently, that used to be there from the original documentary people, and I'm sure maybe you've heard about this. If you have, I'd like to know your take on it. But then apparently the government came, took the footage again, and then gave it back to them. And when they gave it back, the frames where it actually showed the flying saucer landing and then walking out was cut out of the footage. And so all you see is just like this little flying saucer just zip, and then that's all you get.
Oh, Yeah, I haven't looked too much into that, but I mean that is so commonplace, I think. In accounts like that, you see it over and over again, and it's just a matter of, just like how you went on the CIA website, this requires research. You know, I love having conversations with people that do research. Everyone should do research. You can't have a conversation about this and like be so confident in what you're saying, or say this is the way, when there's so much to explore, there's so much to discover, and the rabbit hole is my second home. So that's where I'm at. I mean, that's where you gotta kind of live at to really enjoy this stuff, you know.
I like Clark's take on it. Clark, because we're all entrepreneurial, we're all in the online information, online marketing space, copywriting, what have it. And Clark was like, I don't feel bad about going down the rabbit hole, because it's like, it's our way to kind of tune out from what we do day to day, because our brain is always going and we're always diving deep into what we're doing. So it's kind of like our escape from online marketing and business, but we're just redirecting that same energy towards something that interests us, like the real life sci-fi, like what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm not getting that from copywriting. Like, there's only so much excitement and out of this world stuff that I'm going to encounter. And I need that as I continuously dive deeper into the unknown. I just keep leveling up, where after a while, once you have gone through all of like the basic evidence of, okay, so the CIA knew about this, okay, so this is happening. Then after that, that's when you really start getting into stuff like I was talking about, like looking into, okay, we don't know specifically, we don't have evidence of this race, video or photos, but you really start looking into like the potentials of what's there and like what could happen. And it just gets crazier, man, the more you look into it.
Yeah.
You know, like this idea that, which I think logically makes a lot of sense, that the individuals who we would interact with first with open contact would be not just like us, but very similar to us. And if you think about this whole idea of the abduction phenomenon and what's going on there, well, if you really look into that, there's this idea that genetics taken from these people that are interacting with the great civilization, with these different beings. And what's happening, where is that genetics going? Like, there's human genetics being used in these different theories. And so if it's almost like it's a really cool idea if you think about it, this idea that there are extraterrestrial and human genetics that have been combined, and that they would be the first people that we would actually interact with open contact, because then it's almost kind of like family in a weird sort of way, you know, where it's not so far-fetched because there's a similarity, there's a commonality.
Here's where I kind of stand on the whole UFO conspiracy, is like, the more you look into it, and me, I'm just trying to investigate why, what is the purpose, what is the real truth and what's going on. And it seems like the further in you go, because at the end of the day, we're all trying to draw conclusions based off of the same circumstantial evidence on the surface, but then you dive deeper, and then that's where stuff starts breaking off into different little tangents, and you really don't really know what to accept as fact or which one is more correct than the other, because now you're getting further away from the actual circumstantial evidence. But what really fascinates me is like, or where I come to at the end of the day is like, how does this affect me on a day-to-day basis? And will I ever know the truth? Because I think part of my motivation, obviously going deeper into it, is eventually I want to learn the actual truth and figure out what's actually going on. And the scary part about that is like, will I ever find that out? Right. And there's people who have spent their whole lives trying to figure this shit out and never end up doing it. So I don't know, kind of what's your take on that?
Enjoying the hunt, enjoying the adventure, you know, that the journey of discovery. I mean, that's for me anyway, because I really like looking for clues and uncovering as much as I can in a way that's exciting to me, where I'm just interested to look into it. And so I get what you mean. But I guess I'm trying to do everything I can to get closer. And the only way that we can really get closer is if we really open ourselves up to it, and make an effort, like with the documentary, you know, that you watched recently regarding Stephen Greer and CE5.
Yeah.
He has a protocol and a way for people to get together to create contact, to enhance and accelerate the possibilities of seeing ships. And so the more that people do that, like that, you're getting accustomed to this idea of working and dealing with extraterrestrial energies. And so that is what accelerates the potential idea of contact, because otherwise, if we can't even believe that there's extraterrestrials, that there's aliens in the sky, how can we ever create this idea of open contact in our realities? Like, it's just too far. It's too far away from where we are. But people are becoming more, especially as the Pentagon releases videos. People are I think the coronavirus opened up a lot of shit, like where a lot of people's minds, where I saw memes going around of, you know, well, now that the coronavirus happened, you know, this might as well happen next, and it'll show like UFO landing. So yeah. I think that's big, that people are opening to it. Na 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 na.